it's Mary Ann Dersh with another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. I work with nonprofit leaders to grow their influence so they can ask for and receive all they want, need, and deserve. And you can do that without feeling rejected, ineffective, or pushy, because who wants to feel those things? And I'm really excited today because this is a different topic, but I think it's interesting and it's one I don't really know a lot about. And my guest today is Elyse Wallnutt. And she is smart. She's really smart. And she's founder of the Agility Lab Consulting. And her background or her expertise is in equipping nonprofits to understand and plan for the rising audience demand for privacy so they can grow their marketing reach and brand reputation. So we have a growing need for privacy, and yet we need to be able to find people and know about them, and those two things may be coming in conflict, right? So Elyse, that's what we're going to talk about today, correct?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And before I start, I always open with the same question. And we're recording this at the beginning of the new year. And so, everything's fresh. So maybe this answer will come easy to you. But what is something that you are incredibly proud of, but you don't get to brag about a lot?
Ooh, I guess I'm supposed to start bragging about it more. But I think it's really taking the leap to build this consultancy. I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit, but I've walked myself back from taking the leap. I've, set up savings accounts and haven't done it. And really, I think having it be a lot more of a discussion in the last couple of years of people being brave and being willing to jump outside their comfort zones. I'm proud that I've actually done it. So
yeah,
I think
you took the leap.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I think it's really exciting right now too, because I think nonprofits really need support in this area. And I spent so much time in-house that I'm excited to be able to work with people I already know and also help people that I don't.
Work with a lot of new people. And, it does come to a time where we just decide, you have to just decide. And I think, in the world, just in general, we want to, they're like, when everything's safe, when there's the absence of risk, then I'll do it. And that never comes, right? So being able to just jump in, that's a beautiful thing. So let's get into this and let's just talk about what is happening as far as I want to set the foundation for this conversation. What is changing as far as the privacy laws are concerned?
So essentially what has happened is, and you listeners and you, Mary Ann, might be familiar with this in your day-to-day life. You've probably become more aware of how your data is being used. There's been, documentaries that have come out about how social networks are using your data. You hear things about how, Siri is picking up your audio and then suddenly you get an ad related to the thing you were just talking about. So essentially people across the US and worldwide really have become concerned about that. And they've been asking their legislators to take action. So 5 states have put into place new privacy regulations that go into place in 2023. And some of them start this week, actually. But that will impact your ability to be able to request a log of any data that a company or business that's over a certain size has on you. And you can request to view it. You can request for it to be deleted. And really, it just opens the floodgates for people to get more of a perspective on what's happening there. And I think from the marketing perspective, the reason that's important is it's become just more of an action point that people need to think about in terms of how they're using data and what they need to communicate to people outwardly about how they're doing that. So the other big thing that's happened is big tech, meaning Facebook, Google, Apple, et cetera. They've also had to protect their own brands and take actions that are going to communicate to their audiences that they're respecting them and that they hear this demand for privacy. And so one of the big things that they're doing is eliminating tracking capabilities so that we as marketers don't have as much insight into what people are doing and what they care about. So a lot of this is good for us as humans, but on the business side, it makes it more ambiguous, and it makes us have to really go back to our creative devices to think about what's going to work marketing wise in terms of placements and in terms of what audiences care about without the support of algorithms and cookies and technology that we've really had the assistance of the past few years.
So there's 5 states you said. Are there more states who are considering this legislation? First of all, what are the 5 states right now?
So California has really been the leader, which, I don't think comes as a surprise to anyone. So they've already had a law in place for the past few years, and they have another going into place this month. And then Colorado, Virginia, Utah, and I believe it's New Hampshire. Connecticut. All the northeastern states, Connecticut, are the 5 that are going to have the new legislation in place this year. But there are 22 states who are considering it. And there's also a federal bill pending that has a lot of bipartisan support. And really whether that moves this year is up to the political powers that be. But if it does move, that's going to have wide-reaching implications. So
that was my next question. Is there federal legislation? So this could be at a time could be like sweeping. Now, I want to say though, so there's a way that we've kind of historically been tracked or monitored, like, radio ratings. But I mean, I'm a lady of a certain age. So I remember, TV ratings, and literally people would make logs of what they watched. Right. Like in the Nielsen rating, you'd be a Nielsen family, and you would write down what TV you watched. And that's how we got our data. But that was more voluntary, right? Like I'm going to be a Nielsen family, and I will write this down. So that's where TV ratings came from. And then everything became digitized. And, I bet people can watch like what shows I watch, how much of them I watch before I move to something. I mean, I bet they can see everything. And then in some ways I'm like, okay, I want them to see everything because in a way, I want them to know what I like, what I don't like. But often, it is creepy. And this whole thing of, I mentioned something to someone about I want to, buy new boots. And then all of a sudden on my Instagram I'm showing me ads of boots, and you're like, whoa, how did that happen? And that's real, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. So what's happening there is you're being retargeted. So when you go to a website right now, there's a small piece of code that's called a third-party cookie, and it lets you be tracked on the website you went to, but also the websites that you subsequently visit. So what that original cookie is doing is gathering information about who you are as a person in terms of, what it thinks you care about based on your digital activities. And when you use those third-party cookies in partnership with, entities like Facebook and Google, who also know what you're doing on their platforms, they can create a model of who you are as a consumer. And that's what's really been scaling digital acquisition in the past few years.
But you said I've heard people just saying it, not even going to the website. Is there a way they are listening?
So it's a bit unclear. Siri can pick up those things, but Apple put into place privacy regulations with their iOS 14 update last summer. So that is supposedly not happening, but it is a little convenient.
I hear anecdotal stories like that, and I just well, maybe they are listening to what you say. I don't know. Okay, so what does this mean for me as nonprofit leader or fundraiser? How is this going to affect how I find and connect with donors?
So really, when it comes to low dollar acquisition, that's really the space that's going to be impacted most. So you are going to see acquisition costs rise and your acquisition volumes lower in the immediate term. So you're probably already seeing this actually in your Facebook numbers, which has been kind of the discussion of the past few months is why is Facebook dying? And really it's not that Facebook is dying, but Apple in 2021 put into place protections that asked users if they wanted to be tracked. 94% of them obviously said no. And because of that, Facebook's reach via mobile really suffered, and they no longer have the ability to target people the way that they used to. So they can't build lookalike models and acquisition profiles at scale the way that they used to. And the reason that Facebook is an important example is it represents what's going to happen with many digital acquisition channels. So Google is looking at eliminating third-party cookies via Chrome. And Chrome owns 64% of the browser market share. And it's also the place where when people are searching on Google or you're running your paid search ads, you're showing up and probably replacing the spend that came out of Facebook, probably putting it into paid search. We're seeing that this year end in lots of people's results is their Facebook costs were rising, so they moved their budget into paid search and everybody got wind of that, and now paid search is really expensive. So we can't keep just moving money from digital channel to digital channel. We need to think long game, and we need to think about the content strategies and the attribution vehicles that are going to help set us up so that we understand who our audiences are and we can get more creative and more one-to-one with reaching them in the future.
So what does the future then look like? Like, what are you helping people prepare for?
So I think the biggest thing right now is getting that baseline understanding of how it's all connected. So I think people are missing the fact that, oh, my Facebook acquisition costs rose and privacy is happening, but they're missing that those things are interlinked. And I think the biggest piece is starting to understand that there are preparation pieces you need to put in place now. So with a lot of these privacy regulations going into place, you're going to be charged with putting together cookie opt-ins if we move in the federal bill direction, so that when you go to a website, you might see a banner that says, hey, we use cookies to track our data. Do you opt in or out? And if everyone opts out, all of your Google Analytics data is going to struggle. So you need to be thinking proactively about that. You need to take stock of the data that you have available to you right now and create as much of a first-party internal understanding of who your audience is that doesn't rely on all of these third parties to tell you who cares about your mission. So really that first step is baselining and ingesting all of that information so that you can start to make good decisions. And the other thing I would do as a nonprofit is start thinking about using some of your digital budget to bring in search engine optimization support in-house.
Okay, so let's hold on that because I want to ask you more about that. But I want to go back to something that you said, because if we're all opting out, right? So then we can't get the robust data. Okay, so then we want to then be able to look in-house and say, okay, instead of relying on those third-party tools, start, assessing what we have and then tracking our own stuff better, which for me goes right in line with a lot of the things that I teach people, which is, social media is constantly changing, and I call it building your house on rented land, right? Like those algorithms can shift. You could lose I know organizations who just lost their page can never get it back. You can't, you're never going to settle a dispute. There's no human beings behind any of this that appear to you.
Yeah.
And so it's our job to get people off social media and into like our orbit, which could be like, what for most it's email, right? But like even YouTube is better because you can subscribe, right? So you can reach out to your subscribers. But like the algorithms, definitely, I feel like people are feeling like their Facebook posts, their I don't know about, like, I just started on Instagram, like their Facebook posts are not getting the reach that they used to have. Now LinkedIn, I feel like is been more robust, but just over in general, that's just they're not connecting with people. And also the gap for me is connecting with people on social media and then moving them from social media into what reliable reach, which would be an email list. And but it's the same thing you're saying. It's like, let's stop looking at Google Analytics and start creating your own baselines and your own measurement tools. So no matter what happens in the world, like you've got your stuff together. Does that make sense? Is that, yeah.
Absolutely. I would still look at Google Analytics for the moment and all of the data you have available to you right now, and really start ingesting that, digesting that, and understanding what you have available, so that if a year from now you understand all the learnings that you've had over the past few years. But yes, the name of the game is really first party data acquisition. And I think the other piece of that is thinking in context first about your content strategy. So thinking about how you can tag your content in a smart way so that you understand in an organic fashion what's rising to the top, how you can create more content like that so that you show up in search results, and really just have that power to understand who cares about what in your audience, and you can scale that. So it's going to be a gradual game. It's definitely going to be slower than it has been. And I think that's really important for people to hear and understand, is that we've been able to bank on these 10% year over year increases for years now. And as these things shift, you're going to need to think pragmatically about how your acquisition volumes will shift and what that means for your budget.
That makes so much sense. And then that also brings us into the SEO conversation. So search engine optimization now becomes more important than ever. Tell us why that is.
So that's how you're going to get people onto your email list. You're going to write great content that everybody's going to care about, that Google's going to favor in their search rankings, and that people are going to find you more organically. And I think the other piece of not just SEO, but content strategy more broadly, is that you can start thinking creatively about how you might develop a thought leadership strategy that positions your C-suite to be on podcasts, and think about events you might start hosting. Really start thinking like marketers, where in the past decade plus, we've had a lot of assistance from these algorithms, but we're going to need to really understand what works. So that SEO support and all of these creative outlets that you might have thought about, there might be a place for influencers in a bigger way, where you're thinking about how you spread your mission message in a more organic way that drives people to sign up for your email list, so that you own that data, and you can scale it.
So it's kind of like almost a cycle now. We're kind of coming back to other things. And I do want to say something about, like the idea of thought leadership, because putting yourself out there, if you're a leader, I think in the past, and this is just from like my experience or what I see, that nonprofit leaders may tend to they have their face on the, of the newsletter or something.
Yeah.
They're not really, that's not really thought leadership. It's like that. What are those new concepts? What are those ideas? What are those things that your singular perspective that you want to share with the world, and really putting a face to that, instead of this is for me what the future looks like. So if I'm an executive director, I don't sit back and let my marketing team develop content. They're developing content about me, not oh, me, look at me. No, they're developing content based on my thought leadership, my vision, my direction, right? That people want to follow. It's a subtle shift, but it's a shift. Does this make sense? And I think it plays right into where you're going, because what I'm hearing from you is when you're developing these, this is your ability to not do that through the algorithm, but to do that through organic, reach. And for people who may be new to this, can you explain just a little bit about SEO and keyword and all of that? Just give us the 1 minute high level view.
Yeah. So the content that you put on your website is, they call it crawled by search engines. So Google is obviously the biggest one, but there are others like Bing that you might use. And when Google crawls your site, they're evaluating the content and how it might match what people search for. So if you're searching for, great podcasts about nonprofits, and your site, Marianne, really touts the fact that you are a leader in this space, Google will make sure that it shows up higher in the search results when somebody types in that. It's called a query. So the content that you create, the words that you use within your content, and really the framing of how you put things together impacts where you rank in those search engines.
And then how do people, like, find like the keywords and the content people are looking and searching for?
So there are tools that you can use. Google has a keyword planner that's very useful. You can, type in a few words related to the type of content that you might create for your mission. And I think what's important is to focus first on your brand. You want to make sure that you are showing up for people who already know you and are searching for you. So you want to make sure that your brand name is very relevant and forward. And you also want to make sure that you are not in a space that's going to be overly competitive. So for nonprofits, I mean, you could, but I wouldn't focus on a keyword strategy around like Christmas presents as it relates to year-end fundraising. You would focus more on keywords that have to do with charitable donation and things that people would search for when they're actually having the intent to donate. That's what you really want to focus on first, is thinking like you would if you were going to Google and going to search for something that your mission supports. So it might be hunger relief, it might be, things that are more mission oriented, but that keyword planner can help you take some of the idea starters that you have and rank how competitive it's going to be, because you want to hit that sweet spot where people are actually looking for it. You want to make sure that it's something that is going to get traction, but also it's content that's not going to be so competitive that you're going to be drowned out.
Yeah, right. A colleague of mine who is a YouTube expert, he said, you want to be the leaf, right? You want to own a leaf, not the whole tree, right? Like you can't own nonprofit, but you could own like hunger relief, right? Like, so you got to pick your leaf of the tree and then own that, because right, because we want to be like, oh, so well known, but really it comes from those niches. And there's something you said, because I want to, that the podcast I did previously with a guest, we talked about using influencer partnerships. And this is nothing, and this doesn't have to be people with 1 million followers. This could be somebody who is an advocate for hunger relief or or whatever, who has 1,000, but they're very influential in their community, right? That, and share your passion, like really looking at more strategies like that. And I think that's kind of where the smaller nonprofits were anyway, so they can maybe just stay doing what they keep doing, right? So how do you, like, who do you work with, and how do you, like, what are some of the organizations that you work with, and then how do you work with them?
So I am working with a different set of organizations. So my structure in terms of offers is based on coming into your organization and helping you workshop to understand the 4 pieces that need to come together for you to be prepared for this stage of really building audience trust. So that involves compliance, it involves tech integrations, but also it involves broader level strategy to build your first party data acquisition plan and where you want to be on the spectrum of audience trust. So for the bigger organizations that I'm, working with, that's people that I already know from the space. So people like the Nature Conservancy, they have a lot of people in those seats who need to come together with representatives from marketing, the tech team and the legal team, and they need to reach agreement on how things move forward.
So it sounds like some of this work is for like bigger organizations, right? Like you work with a lot of like, because you're based out of, I didn't say this before, but you're based out of DC, right? So in the past you've worked with lots of larger institutions, right? Like who have a higher level of complexity. So what is like that mid-sized nonprofit? And I guess I don't know what that, maybe they're not like national, but they're, they've got, 10-20 million dollar budget. Like what are they looking at? What's their future look like?
So I think that this problem, well, this opportunity, if you will, is something that every nonprofit needs to be thinking about. So I think even for smaller nonprofits, they're actually going to be most impacted because Facebook is such an effective and accessible platform up until now. So a lot of their acquisition efforts have probably been focused on things like Facebook. So
Yeah.
that's where I think smaller nonprofits need to be equally incentivized to pay attention to this, because they need to think about other creative strategies to scale. So they need to be thinking about who's in their communities that they can utilize as thought partners. So I think every size nonprofit has an equal stake in paying attention to this. Even the smaller nonprofits are actually probably impacted to a larger extent than some of the larger nonprofits, because larger nonprofits have bigger budgets, so they've been able to diversify their investments. And smaller nonprofits have probably been more focused on the things that work and that are accessible, like Facebook. So as Facebook changes, you need to be thinking about how you get more creative in that acquisition reach. So you might need to think about community leaders and partners that you can put together an influencer strategy with. You need to think about the events you're hosting and really making sure that those event leaders are bringing home the call to action that you need to sign up for their email list. You need to make sure that you are using your staff as your brand ambassadors so that you're scaling that first party data acquisition, because this digital technology is changing. And then similarly, the other big thing to think about is compliance. So if you're of a certain size, I believe it's 10,000 records or more on your file, but don't quote me on that part. You have to be able to comply if a person on your file asks for their records. And your privacy policy needs to reflect how long it's going to take you to provide that to them. You need to have a staff person who's ready to pull that and not have it take 3 weeks of their time. So really there's the operational planning that needs to go into state privacy compliance. And there's also the piece of the marketing nuts and bolts that you need to think about diversification for. So small nonprofits have the same challenges as bigger nonprofits. Bigger nonprofits probably, though, are going to need to think more about setting internal conversations so that everyone's on the same page. The legal team needs to be including the marketing team in building the privacy policy, because if they don't understand what marketing's doing, they're going to miss pieces of what the privacy policy reflects. So really, I think it's internal consensus building, making sure that you're having those strong forward-thinking partnerships and conversations, no matter what size nonprofit.
Right, because that could be legal, marketing, fundraising. Like what you're saying is they all sort of have to work together to make sure they're in compliance on this.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm not sure, like you said, 10,000 records, that's not very many. I think a lot of people who are listening have 10,000 records on their database.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's really important is, even, logistics and technicalities aside, this is what's happening. We saw GDPR go into effect for Europe in 2016, and now we're seeing US states implement the same policies, and people aren't going to stop caring about how their data is being used. So rather than developing, a state by state approach, it's really just better to start embracing this as the way of the future and to build something that's going to be sustainable, because change is going to keep coming and you want to be ahead of that rather than
Right.
waiting for it.
And I am loving this conversation so much because the whole thing I preach is building this brand of attraction and you
Yeah.
know, and like pulling people in, and because as my good friend Amy Fazio says, people come for the cause, but they stay for the community. Like creating this community of support with this brand of it, like pulling people to you so that when stuff like this happens, like you're like, oh, you know, if Facebook's dying, like, oh, you're in a panic because you're pulling everything from there. It's like, oh, okay, you know, we have the ability now. We know how to get our own needs met. I don't have to rely on the third party stuff. Okay, I have a question. Okay.
Yeah.
So if somebody says, do you accept cookies? Should I say yes or no? Because I always say yes. Am I
Well, so this is actually a big part of the strategy on the marketing end is a lot of those browser pop-ups right now, you can hit accept all or reject all, or you can create the options so that people can self-select which ones they want to opt into. So I still accept them because I understand the value of what's happening for marketers. But if you're more conservative and you don't want to see those shoes following you around, you can hit reject all and err on that side. You can also be doing things like in your browser, you can wipe your history, and you can use different browsers so that those things automatically don't get tracked.
Okay, I have one last question,
Yeah.
and then we'll wrap up. So I this is always my last question. So I am a karaoke fan. I love karaoke. And if I'm ever in DC, which I'm pretty sure I will be, and we wind up at a karaoke bar, what's gonna be your go-to song? What's Elyse gonna sing for me?
Ooh, I love anything by Queen. I will say I've never actually done karaoke though, so I don't have a go-to.
What? I have so much to teach you.
So that's my secret fact of the day. But so yeah, maybe you can help me select my first karaoke song ever.
We can definitely find one. Yes, and Queen's always a good one because here's the thing, you just pick something everyone sings along to and then it doesn't matter, we're all having fun. So
Yeah.
that's perfect. All right, Elyse,
Yeah.
thank you so much. If listeners want to reach out for you, I've got your we'll put your social media handles and contact info in the show notes, but how can people reach you?
So my site is agilitylab.io. And I am available on LinkedIn, Elyse Wallnutt. Wallnut is spelled with 2 L's and 2 T's, which throws everybody. So agilitylab.io is probably easier to remember.
All right. And it's all in the show notes. So you can reach out to Elyse if you want to talk to her more about your privacy and compliance and all of that stuff. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing a topic I think, you know, we started this conversation thing. Not a lot of people know about this. So thank you for helping us prepare for the future.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for this episode of The Influential Nonprofit. As always, you can go to influentialnonprofit.com and download your Uplevel Your Influence Starter Kit with all kinds of cool goodies to help you be a more effective leader. And if you are looking for a speaker for a conference workshop or one of your AFP chapter meetings, please, you can always reach out to me at Marianne@courageouscommunication.com because I would love to share some more stuff with you. And we'll see you next time on The Influential Nonprofit.